Okay, hey everybody. So this is our first of two lectures that I'm giving to you in a sort of a non-traditional way. So these are going to be YouTube videos, and I would encourage you to, as you're watching this on YouTube, to have the slides open, the PDF of the slides that is available on Moodle. On those slides, there will be links to videos that you can watch. I'll probably ask you to pause the video here and either answer a question or like watch some of those videos. Try to make it as close to class as possible, although I know you're probably watching by yourself. And so these are the two lectures that we missed when the week after spring break, things got moved around, including exam 2 getting moved a week. So, okay, we're going to start today talking about communication. Communication is a really, really, really important part of the life of any organism. Even things like plants and single-celled organisms do communicate with one another. And so we're going to focus on some of the amazing adaptations and anatomy that vertebrates have to do some kinds of communicating. This picture here is of an alligator doing some very, very, very important communicating to its reproductive success. It's a male alligator, and we're going to talk about that a little later today. All right, so what is communication? Communication is something you guys probably do have a pretty good handle on what it is. And so here's a technical definition we can use. So the transfer of information between organisms. So I'm talking to you, I'm giving you information, you're an organism and I'm an organism with specialized signals. So I'm using human language and spoken word. My brain is hearing sounds and interpreting them and giving them meaning. I'm making sounds with anatomy I have in my throat that's connected to my lungs. All I'm doing is passing air over cords to give you information that your brain can use. So communication is like a pretty phenomenal sort of emergent property of different kinds of organisms' anatomy. And so most of the kinds of ways when we think about communication, and most of what we're going to talk about today really, is for communication within a species. A lot of the specialization, so some human specialization might be spoken word and then having language stand in for abstract ideas. Most of that communicating that's specialized happens between individuals of a single species. So giraffes can talk with or share communication signals with other giraffes. Parrotfish can with other parrotfish. And so that's what most of communication is. And so I'm going to have you think for a minute here. So go ahead and pause the video for a second. Take as much time as you want, really. And like actually try, first minute, write down 4 very different ways. So not just like this bird sings and that bird sings and that bird sings, but like 4 different ways vertebrates communicate with each other. So like within a species. So go ahead and do that. Okay, hopefully I'm now talking to you and you've unpaused after writing down a few. I wish we were having class in person always so that like I could actually hear some of your ideas and like put them on the board. But I'm sure you come up with some pretty cool ones. And so a question I have then for you guys is to now maybe pause the video again in a second here and think about what kinds of communications extend beyond the species. So there actually is a whole lot of communication, organism to organism, that happens interspecifically, so between members of different species. And in fact, one thing I want you to do when you think about communications extending beyond just one species is to actually imagine yourself. You are an organism. What kinds of communication have you had with other organisms in your life? You can, of course, think of animals like pets that you have in your home. There's fishes, there's dogs, there's horses maybe that you have had in your life and you've probably communicated with, where you've understood one another, you've transferred information to one another. And so take a minute to think about all that. And I especially would encourage you, and maybe we'll share these out at the end of the course. I think I know when we would do that. Any fun examples you might have of like wild animals communicating with you or you communicating with them. That's true too. All right, so go ahead and pause the video and take a minute to write those down. All right, hopefully you've now unpaused. I hope you could think of a few. Like I know like there's definitely been times when I guarantee it you've been threatened by an animal or you've been able to like yell or do something to communicate your threat to an animal. And of course, there's much nicer versions of communication than that. Those are just sort of the fun ways to get you thinking about how that works between species. And so, of course, when you talk about communication, there's all kinds of different channels of communication, ways of giving that information between organisms. And I hope you can see, especially as this class continues, just how integrated so many of these anatomical and physiological systems really are to the living life that any organism is going through. So the channels of communication, I've done it here intentionally, can be broken down into like how they can be sensed, how they can be sent, and how they can be received. So this ties in really nicely with our like senses lecture from before the last exam. So you can communicate chemically, and that can be sensed by other organisms via smell or taste, or you can smell and taste, chemical communications. If you guys ever cut an onion and then the onion releases chemicals to like try to get you to stop cutting it and you start crying, right? It's releasing an irritant. It is a plant that thinks it's getting bitten like once. You're probably chopping it up in a million pieces. It's getting cut. And so it's trying to release, it is releasing a chemical that is like deterring you, right? It is trying to make you stop. So chemical communication, visual communication, of course, is sensed by sight, acoustic, that's hearing, tactile, sensed by touch. And then there's other channels of communication that you and I just don't have. We have to have special instruments in order to do that. So things like electric communication, that electro receivers or electro creating organs we don't even have. So we can't make or receive those without special equipment. We also need special equipment to like extend the range of our senses for a bunch of these other ones. We can see in infrared and ultraviolet if we use special cameras. Other organisms don't need to do that. They can emit maybe or receive those signals in those modes with their own inherent anatomy that we, like as humans, which are just one kind of organism, don't have. And so what I think is really cool to remember, and I think these dolphins sitting here at the top of the slide, I hope you can like take a minute and look at those. Most communication styles is a whole combination. Think about when you are talking to somebody, you're seeing, you're hearing, you might be smelling, you know, there's all kinds of information you're gathering all at once through all your senses. So it can be communicated to you, or you can give off communication in a bunch of different channels all at once. And so those dolphins are pretty complicated organisms, social hunters, and they are sending and receiving information all the time. All right, I want to start going through just like some fun examples of communication, starting with smell, chemoreception, just like we did when we had the senses lecture, because, you know, this is one of the most ancient kinds of communication. Single-celled organisms are communicating through chemoreception, chemical release. And so you guys usually experience that as smell and sort of taste as well, but we're not going to talk too much about taste. And here's just some really fun examples of organisms that use smell adaptively. And so a lot of it has to do with mating. So the desert iguana, garter snakes, and this great frog, the magnificent tree frog, all communicate with chemicals. And so we'll start with the frog there. I think you can see that the frog has like a pretty huge swelling on its head. Many species of frog, including most toads, have like pretty gnarly glands up on their head where they can secrete noxious like chemicals or things to defend themselves. The magnificent tree frog, the males inflate the part of their head. He's really got that full of secretions of these pheromones. And these pheromones are absolutely extremely exciting and like addictive to female magnificent tree frogs. And so in the mating season, he will find a perch, he will sing a song, he will ribbit. And that's an acoustic signal he's sending far out into the forest. But what he's also sending out is these pheromones. And when females smell these pheromones, and they've done this with like lab studies, they just get extremely excited and like just try to find the guy who's got like the best smelling pheromones. He's also calling. So there's scent signals as well as acoustic signals. But I thought you guys would appreciate seeing like a frog with an inflated head full of sexy smells. Smell is an interesting thing because it's chemical and you want to send it as far as you can. But of course, like that's difficult in the air because how much of it are you going to make and how long is it going to last? And so a really cool example of that is this desert iguana. So that lizard there is an animal that lives in the American Southwest. And so you can secrete like volatiles, so like a liquid secretion that gives off a really powerful scent. So like a perfume that we might wear or a cologne we might wear is a volatile. The problem in the desert is if you secrete this like liquid that can release this volatile scent molecule, it's not going to last very long. It dries out really fast. And so in fact, what desert iguanas do when they're mating is, or trying to find mates, I should say, is they will release these scent packets that have a really, really, really like low volatility. So they'll last for a few days out in the desert. But the problem is they don't smell very much because they're really low volatility. So what these iguanas do is they have a UV, an ultraviolet marker on their little scent pack. And iguanas have tetrachromatic vision, right? They have 4 cones. And so those lizards can see on a branch far away that little glint of ultraviolet. And so they can see it from far away and then they can go over to it. And then when they're there, they can smell it. And that lets them know, like, I'm receptive, or this is my territory. They can communicate with these incredible ultraviolet, so visual lure into a smell communication about mating. Really fun, I think. Last fun example about smell is garter snakes. So we kind of talked about this when we had our lecture on extreme metabolism, and so how animals like might overwinter. And so garter snakes are some snakes that live pretty far north in North America. And so in the spring, when they emerge from like winter dormancy, usually what happens is a lot of mating all at once. So in this image there, you can see a female. She's a pretty big snake in the middle, and then just like an unbelievably almost gross amount of males, and they're all trying to mate with her. And so something that's like pretty fantastic is that she releases pheromones because she is a female that is receptive to males. She wants to have her eggs fertilized so she can lay her eggs. And what happens in these garter snakes is there's tons and tons and tons of males that have evolved the ability to evolve pheromones that mimic the female's pheromones. And so they will release those, and males will be all over them trying to mate with them, while they can like have to deal with that, of course, but then also pursue the female. And so they know which one's the real female, and they're tricking all the other like kind of horned up boys to like chase them for a second while they are the ones that are focusing on the actual snake in the pile that's a female. Pretty crazy. And again, these are all pheromone examples from these reptiles and amphibians. Oh, there we go. UV scent markers, tricksy pheromone boys. I should have been putting these on. And head pheromones for that magnificent tree frog. So like really fun scent adaptations that are communicating really specific things. In this case, these are all kind of like mating calls. And so one point I like to make about smell is like, you know, you and me, we just aren't really in a world where smell is a super important sense. You guys have seen this before. I feel like you understand it, right? So having 4 types of cones, so the cells on the back of your eyeball and your retina, they can absorb light. 4 cone types is like the condition that most vertebrates have for color vision, being able to see pretty far. Animals that can go up into the ultraviolet are tetrachromatic, and so they can see more than we can. Mammals have a loss. We lost 2 of our cone types during dinosaur times, when mammals were very small animals, mostly in the trees, and almost certainly nocturnal or crepuscular, which means like dusk and dawn. So like for millions and millions of years, mammal evolution happened in the context of nighttime. And so we have pretty good pretty good rods, low light condition sight. Mammals generally do, I mean, and then lost those cones. Which is like an interesting thing. I think that's amazing that we can see how that fits into Earth history. And so after dinosaurs, at least the big ones, go extinct, mammals sort of radiate, become all these big forms of life on the planet. And so most of them, because of that time we spent having nocturnal habits for millions and millions and millions of years, all the mammals of today have inherited this 2-cone type. So relatively reduced color vision relative to other animals. And so smell, which is great at night, is something that most of the mammals in the world today actually do communicate with. Smell is really common amongst most mammals. You are a human. I know we've talked about this. And humans, and not all monkeys, but some monkeys, the old world monkeys, so African and Eurasian monkeys, that includes us, a novel mutation gave us 1 cone type back. So like a squirrel monkey or a lemur only has 2, just like a deer, just like a fox. But you and I have 3. And one of the other things that happens in human evolution especially is that we get big brains and small faces. And so we kind of lose that smell ability. So it's so weird to think about, right? Like, so mammals in general have relatively poor color vision and relatively excellent senses of smell compared to other vertebrates like birds or fish or lizards. But then you and me and a couple kinds of other primates actually lost the really good sense of smell and gained back part of the color vision. Really bizarre, right? It makes it funny that we're the species that's like doing all this observing of all the rest of the world. I know I've talked about this before, but it's just one of those things I really like for you guys. So smell isn't a big part of your life as a human, but it's a huge part of so many other mammals' lives. There are parts of the mammal glandular skin that have organs that secrete many, many, many different kinds of chemical markers. Anal glands are very common in carnivores. You guys have probably heard about people who have dogs or cats that need expression of their anal glands. I guess that's really true for dogs. But there's also glands in the wrist and all over the body for different kinds of animals, mammals especially, for doing all kinds of communicating. So these cheetahs, they're brothers, they're marking their territory. They can put, along with their urine, chemical signatures all over the place. Those mongoose are very, very social relatives of things like meerkats, and they live in places like Africa and Asia. And what they do as a big group is like they're always moving around their territory, and there could be 20, 30, 40 of these individuals, and they'll like find the same scent markers day after day, and like a bunch of them will mark different spots. Like as a group, they can communicate like where their ever kind of evolving territory has its boundaries, and they can all sense it, and they can identify each other like to the individual level, like who marked this, okay, and so they keep their territory really well bounded. That's just not something humans do. Humans do not mark territory with scent. Here's a male rhinoceros, like kind of out on patrol. I'll let you just take that in for a second. He's like walking around his territory. Their territories are pretty flexible, rhinoceroses, but still this male is using his urine to chemically, using smell, mark the edges of his territory. Hippos are probably funnier, I think, than rhinoceroses. So what hippos do is usually use their feces and the smell of their individual scent in the feces to like mark the edges of their territory. So it's not true for every time a hippo defecates, but when a hippo is marking territory, what they'll do is flap their tail back and forth while they're defecating. And so a lot of their feces is like a lot of just plant material and plant husks. It's like, it's pretty gross, but it's not like particularly gross feces. It's very plant heavy. But there's this male, you can tell he's a male, I think, spraying his feces all around his enclosure at the zoo. Again, not something very familiar with us. But what's cool is other primates, though. So this ring-tailed lemur is a primate like you. It's got the fingernails and the grasping hands and the binocular vision. But this is a primate that is not a part of the clade that we're in, that has that mutation for a third cone type. And so these lemurs have the same kind of color vision as these other mammals. And so they, even though they're primates, use scent as like a primary territory marker. So here's a lemur using his anal glands to mark territory on a tree in Madagascar. And what's really cool is those lemurs also have glands in their wrists that release pheromones. And so they'll put into their tails, they'll work their tails with their wrists and put a bunch of like sexy pheromones into their very cool ringed tails. And then when they're walking around or they're living their lives socially, they can like waft their tails around to release their pheromones and like have females or males smell them on their fur. That's really cool. You and I, of course, certainly do have pheromones, but they're kind of like a subconscious thing for us. And these other primates, just goes to show you, other primates that are still very scent focused in their sensory system, they can communicate using scent in ways that we just cannot. Anyway, it's pretty sweet, right? One more example that I just think is so cool. This is the brown hyena, and this just goes to show you like how advanced some of these adaptations can get. What you're seeing next to that hyena is a stick with 2 scent markings on it. I'm actually, sorry, this is live and I'm forgetting which one's which, but I'm pretty sure what it is there's a white scent marker. These are both released from glands on the backside of the animal, so like anal glands. That white scent marker is a territory marker, and it will last for like a month until any brown hyena that comes around, or probably any other carnivoran really that comes around, that this is like brown hyena territory. It's long lasting. It's not a really strong scent, but when you're there, you can smell it, and it's meant to last for a long time. At the same time that that brown hyena leaves that one, it will leave that black scent. And that black one that it leaves is very short-lived. It only lasts for a few hours, and it communicates to like other members of that hyena's group. They're like, hey, I've been here, I checked, I left a marker, it's good. And so there's these 2 completely different secretions that this hyena can make to do different things: communicate territory boundaries to all kinds of animals that last for a month, communicate presence and individual information to other members of its group that only lasts for a few hours because they're all out on patrol at the same time. Isn't that just like awesome? I mean, it's pretty gross, but it's also really amazing that like these different glands can be used to do so many different kinds of things. Oh, there it is. Look at this. I have it on the slide. So this one lasts for a month, and this one's only there for a few hours. All right, so that was kind of smell. Smell is an easy way to communicate if you have the adaptation to like take in smell. You and I are primates that are very much based on sight. and hearing, but really sight is our big thing. And so I know when I asked you that question earlier about like, what's a time that you've participated in interspecific communication with other species? One of the things I always think of if I ask that question, I know it might have been like, huh, for you, is things like body language. You can tell a lot about that elephant and that cobra and all kinds of things about these different cats because you are also an animal. You can sense when that cat is feeling threatened or when that cat is feeling angry because you can see it. This elephant and this cobra are kind of going about their lives, slithering along, eating bushes. You can communicate with them. You can receive intentional signals from them when they send them off. If you see the same elephant doing this or the same cobra doing that, this is behavioral, but it's also anatomical, flapping the ears out, pulling the hood up, the cat raising its back up. There is communication broadly across a lot of kinds of animal life of things like threat displays. So just by sight, you are able to communicate. That elephant is able to make you go away. That cobra is able to warn you. And it wasn't warning you, is that going to go? And you could take that in. So just kind of think about that and think about that kinds of communication that's possible between organisms. One thing that I think is really cool is we can kind of see through comparative anatomy, especially of like the external features of organisms, so their scales or their feathers and their patterns that are on their bodies, all kinds of things that like evolution works on in an ecosystem. And so just based on sight, maybe not worrying about what you can see, although we can certainly see this, you can kind of think about the coloration or the patterning of animals within their ecosystems and what they mean. So here's like a few examples I mean of that. And I hope these kind of click and you kind of get what I'm talking about. So based on sight, you can tell things like rank. So over here on the left are these house sparrows. These are these really common birds that have been introduced all over the world. They're really comfortable living with us humans. You probably have seen them your whole life. And so if you're a house sparrow and you see another house sparrow, like they all might look similar to you, but to each other, there's really clear differences. And so the amount of black on the throat and upper chest there is like a sign of rank. Only the males have that coloration to begin with. And like the biggest, oldest, like kind of dominant males, even though the flock's all mixed up, are going to have the biggest black bib. So things like rank are something that can be communicated through like signaled through the feathers, the integument, something that's gained through like the actual maturity of the animal. The older it gets, the black expands. And then you know something about each other like right away if you are a house sparrow. All those bibs of different sizes on different males. Another one that I think is just so cool is uniforms. So what you're seeing here is a porcupine fish, like a big spiky kind of fish related to puffers. And right now it's at a cleaning station on a reef. So there's places on a reef where little wrasses, those blue and yellow and black striped fishes, all the different species of those cleaner wrasses all have the same kind of striping. There's lots of kinds of those cleaner fish, but they all look the same. So that signal, that pattern all across the ocean, if you're an angelfish or a big old other kind of fish, or if you're this porcupine fish, those cleaner fish are almost wearing uniforms. You know you can trust them. You know you can swim up to them and open your mouth and slow your swimming, and they will come up. And they're getting a meal out of it, of course. They're going to eat the parasites off of you, eat the chunks of food out of your teeth, maybe. So they're getting a meal out of it. But they're wearing uniforms. That they're communicating that to you. You can see it. As you're swimming along the reef and you might need a clean, you'll see them be like, oh, good, there's the cleaning place. They're wearing what you can think of as uniforms, communicating their ecology to other animals. That's really cool. The lionfish down at the bottom there is a big, intense fish. And I think probably I don't have to say too much about this. It's just like the cobra and the elephant. That lionfish not only has pretty sharp spines in its fins and on its back, it's also a venomous fish. And so it has venom in some of those spines. And I think its like body right there communicates that with you. You don't have to spend a lot of time like talking or wondering about that fish. That fish is giving you a very clear signal. We call that apostomatism. It is dangerous. Do not try to eat it. Do not touch it. In a minute, you guys are going to get another lecture to look at on YouTube about things like defense and deception. And we'll talk more about that kind of thing. But again, based on sight, right? That lionfish is communicating to everybody else. A really good example of sight and anatomy has to do, I think, with like us great apes and monkeys to like a lesser degree. But you, with your brain that is a human brain, have an absurd ability to remember human faces. You can remember many, 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 many individual human faces. They do not all look the same to you. And so can a lot of other great apes. And then the other thing that a lot of us great apes have is like an extreme amount of movement capable in our facial muscles. We can make a lot of facial expressions. And I won't belabor this point because you guys are humans, but I think you know that like facial expressions can be pretty subtle and you can communicate quite a bit with facial expressions. And so it's very cool how people are able to study how like our facial expressions and the facial expressions of great apes sometimes mean really similar things and sometimes don't mean really similar things. So like what you might think of as like a smile is the famous example, that bared teeth chimpanzee at the bottom left. That's like a very submissive, like scared face a chimp might make. And so when a guy makes it kind of how the chimp's making it, I think you could tell right away, yeah, that guy isn't like smiling at me just because he's showing his teeth. There's lots of ways to do that. And so I just want to like reinforce that like you are an organism and you are very, very, very well adapted for certain kinds of visual communication. And human sight and human facial expression is one that you like absolutely get so much information from all the time. Okay. So we did some chemosensory, talking about chemical signaling, so usually smell, sometimes taste. Just did some visual stuff. Again, this is like a real crash course, I know. Now I want to talk about sound. Sound is like probably my favorite. I love the sounds of the natural world, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. And so communication happens between almost everybody on land and in water with some kind of sound. And so that might surprise you for some of the water animals, but we're going to talk about that in a little bit here. Certainly on land, you're very familiar with it. I don't even think I have to say too much about this slide. Birds, frogs, mammals, very, very, very dominate communications from sound, especially during reproductive times, marking territories, talking to members of their own species. Animals like crows, we know can transmit complex ideas to one another, abstractions almost, things that other crows never saw, they can be told about by other crows. We know that experimentally. And the only way that information could possibly be passed down between crows has to be, I mean, we don't know what else it could be, through sound when they all roost together at night. I'm going to post a link. It'll be with the Moodle slides to like a bunch of just like clips. So you guys can click on them if you'd like. I really would encourage you to like listen to some of these sounds. I know you probably know what wolf howls sound like, but I really think the siamang, which is a gibbon there, and the loon are two of like the greatest animal noises you can ever hear. Those calls are like just so beautiful and so fantastic. And so, those wolves can be coordinating a hunt all together when they're spread out in the forest. The siamang and the loon are establishing the edges of their territories. They're calling to other members of the same species and like setting those boundaries. So same thing could be done with smell. They're doing it with sound. Things like the frog peeping. Frog peeping is almost always about mating. So ribbit, ribbit. While you're looking at this though, like look at the different kinds of anatomy that are probably involved with making these sounds. The wolf is a mammal, the siamang is a mammal. They're using parts of their larynx, which we're going to talk about in a second, to create sound. How are the birds doing it? How is the frog doing it? The frog and that gibbon, the siamang, are doing really interesting things by like expanding the air chamber of their throats. The frog way more than the siamang, but like making this resonant chamber. Really cool, right? I mean, that is a really remarkable adaptation for communication. So let's get into a little bit of details here about sound and sound production. If we were in class live, I wouldn't have shown you this. Well, no, I would have shown you this picture, and then I would have played sounds that belong to each one of these animals and tried to have you guys guess which one is which. I think all 4 of these animals make sounds that you would absolutely not expect. And so again, on the slides, I'll post one of the slides will have just like links on the PDF that'll take you to like YouTube and you guys can listen to these sounds. But like a mammal, a bird, a lizard, and a crocodilian all making really remarkable sounds that are super fun. So I hope you will enjoy that. And they're doing them for all kinds of, different reasons. Again, with sound, it has to do so much with you guys really seeing things. And so one way that crocodilians communicate, and this is a case specifically of male alligators establishing their territories and trying to get females to mate with them, is to release these really low, we almost can't hear them at all, infrasonic, so low frequency sounds that travel through the water. When they release those sounds, it's such a strong force that like the water on their back dances and moves in a certain way. When they're first taking in the air, they kind of have a bellow that we can hear, but then the rest of what they do is such a low frequency that you and I can't hear it. And so there's a video here. I encourage you to click on it, and I'll stop talking here. I know I've been talking a lot. Let you pause the video, and then you can, or pause my video and then click on that link and watch it. It's a few minutes long. If you want to click a minute or two in, that's okay. It's a lady who like plays the sound to try to get all the alligators in a pond to like respond to it. It's really cool to watch. So I will let you watch that. So go ahead and pause. So that's a cool thing, right? These animals have air sacs. They have unidirectional respiration within their lungs. So it doesn't invade their bones like it does in birds, but within their lungs, they have unidirectional respiration. And so they're able to like create that sound, and partly has to do with their body size in their chest and send it out. I think it's really cool for you guys to hear that, like that noise of when a crocodile or an alligator, an alligator is bringing in all that air. I hope you noticed in the video, if you watch the whole thing, there's one time when she says, wow, it's like hearing dinosaurs. And I hope you guys all like rolled your eyes, because it kind of is, I guess, in some ways, because they probably were similar to crocs, but like every single bird is a dinosaur. So like listening to that loon is really like hearing a dinosaur. But anyway, I know what she means. So I hope you liked that. Just a really cool example of sound communication, and a really cool biological thing, a really cool behavior that, again, I just really love sharing with you guys in a class like this. I want to talk a little bit about how sound is made and the anatomy behind it. So you are probably most familiar with sound. I'm certainly making the sounds that I make with my vocal cords. So within my throat, I have this big structure called a larynx, or a voice box. And so you can see on that diagram of a person, there's the mouth, and then up to the nose. And so that's the air passage that really goes down to the lungs. And the lungs themselves, as you guys know, is an offshoot of the digestive tract. So that like ancient osteichthyon foregut diverticulum, the little line on the figure that says supraglottis, that line is crossing over the little diverticulum that of course leads down the trachea to the lungs, whereas behind tracheas, there's the esophagus that goes down, it goes down all the way to the stomach. And so it's really cool to have our respiratory anatomy be the source of how we can make some of our sounds. All we're doing as we breathe is passing air back and forth over these really tight cords, basically like a valve in your throat. And you and I and other humans, but as far as we can tell, not really very many other hominids, even from the fossil record, have the ability to like communicate so delicately, to make these small moves when our vocal cords, to create the absolute huge amount of sounds we can make. I wish this was like a little more human focused sometimes, because it's really interesting to hear like how people who sing or who do all kinds of really impressive vocal work like can actually use the anatomy and like tone it up, and then like use their lungs, use their diaphragm in ways that like I certainly just cannot. But all mammals have this larynx. All mammals have these like bones that used to be part of the gill structure called the hyoid around their larynx. It's pretty cartilaginous in most of us now. It's not ossified. But so you are using vocal cords here in your throat to create sound. And that is the same way that like a wolf is making a howl, or a siamang is doing its call across the rainforest. Now they have additional pieces, like especially that siamang's like inflated part of its throat. And the wolf has the ability to like really line things up and create this resonant frequency within the tracts to do that big long howl. But still in mammals, they're using the same structure, this voice box, this larynx, which is right at the top of the trachea, right after the turn off from the tube that's going to the stomach. And so it's really tied into our respiration. You get out of breath when you are trying to talk a lot or sing a lot or do things like that. It's happening to me right now. And that is just a fact that is like where the anatomy is. I just think that's really, really special. That's how mammals make a lot of these big sounds. Birds are, usually quite clearly in people's mind, some of like the animals you think of the most when you think of sound. And it's not like they're all created equal, though. most birds are kind of squawky and, they can make noises, but those noises aren't like necessarily melodious and beautiful. They are just possible. And that's true for most mammals, if you think about it too. So sound being like a precisely used to communicate lots and lots and lots of things is the exception. So humans can talk. We can make a million really precise little sounds that are very species specific, right? We're the only ones that talk. A lot of birds, and actually because of the abundance of songbirds, so little perching birds that sing songs, like half of all bird diversity are these little colorful birds that live all over the world. And so actually about half the bird species in the world, just a little bit less, are in this clade songbirds that has this ability to like sing, to do all kinds of beautiful notes. All of those songs can be used to establish territories and boundaries, but for so many birds, they're communicating with each other and they're finding mates. These are all examples of males singing songs. These songs are all species specific. Females use the songs alongside things like color and decoration to pick their mates. But it's really cool, I think, for you guys to think about pelicans and penguins and ostriches and, eagles, they all can make noises, but they don't like sing songs. It's really just songbirds. What's really cool is there's some special anatomy that goes into songbird singing that I'm going to show you here in a second. And something that's only been true in terms of like humans knowing about it for the last decade or so has been the true phylogeny of all the big bird groups. And sister to the songbirds are parrots. Parrots and songbirds are each other's closest relatives. And I'll get you guys know, and I bet you guys know that parrots are very, very vocal too. They make a lot of squawks and kind of like garbly songs. They also can like talk. They can like mimic human speech. So it's really interesting because new research is going into like the neuroanatomy, the brain function, and like the genetic architecture to like let birds like songbirds and birds like parrots sing or talk, and how those have like a homology potentially that goes back to the common ancestor of things like songbirds and parrots. So that's a lot of bird species that can do that, which is really cool. The thing I want to say the most probably about songbirds' song is they always can make very complicated sounds. So it's kind of like if you listen to some songbird sounds, there's like a little bit of like a tweet, 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 usually kind of happening, and then a different kind of note that might be deeper happening like underneath it. And that's all very precise. Songbirds have very specific like phrases in their songs. And the way a bird does that is totally different from how you use your vocal cords. And so birds are not using a larynx, so structure up in the throat where the lungs and the stomach kind of split from each other, right at the top where that foregut diverticulum would be. Birds use a syrinx, which are two different valves, one on either side of each lung, that could control, kind of like your vocal cords, each different side of the animal. And so because there's two of them, birds can do one at one time, one at the other time, and create like two sounds at once. And the way that they can like use like the air sacs in their body and then also play those two at different times in different ways and bounce them off each other, birds can create this like really incredible diversity of sound. Like male birds and female birds too, but like especially for like mating songs, male birds have to like learn how to make the song of their species, and it takes a long time and a lot of control. I want you guys to think about what you know about birds and how their lungs are rigid structures, and they're using air sacs in front of and after their lungs to like actually pump air through their bodies, right? That unidirectional respiration. So think about how they'll be able to control that, sometimes use those as like resonant structures. Non-songbirds that also do a lot of noise making, like a grouse, can like puff up a big air sac and like boom, boom, like make kind of bouncy noises. This syrinx, though, is very specific to songbirds, so passerine birds, so the bluebird, chickadee, the birds you're seeing here. Birds generally are all about color and vision. That's true. And they're all about sound. That's true, just like us. So I always think like that's one of the reasons people like birds so much, because they're colorful and they're vocal, and we are color seeing primates that are very vocal. So I always think there's like a fun connection there with us. I like to put this picture up here only because lots of birds that cannot sing still incorporate noise into their mating displays. Some of you around here might recognize this bird. This is a flicker. It's a kind of woodpecker that lives in our area. So absolutely not a songbird, absolutely does not have a syrinx. But this time of year, they're usually driving people crazy because they're flying up to people's houses and barns and even cars and front doors and using metal on our homes to like create drumming noises. So they usually do trees, right? As a woodpecker, like on the side of a tree. But of course, like the top to your vent on your house or the side of your chimney or your front door is a lot louder to go against. And so I don't know if you've experienced that, but keep your ears out for it. There's a lot of birds that can't sing, but still like use sound to communicate and try to like attract mates. So I guess one last thing I'll say is it's cool to me on that GIF of the syrinx that you can see the little colors light up way down in the bird's chest. So it's not like a mammal with a larynx in the throat. The syrinx is down kind of like at the lungs in the bird's body cavity. I want to spend just a little bit of time sharing with you guys about sound in water. And so some of the earliest examples of humans even being aware of like the acoustics of the ocean, of way animals would communicate with sound in the ocean, are whales. So in like the 1970s was the first time hydrophones were really, well, I guess the 60s and 70s, first time hydrophones were like really recording whale song. And we were able to hear that like many species, especially a big baleen whale, sing these songs that travel really far, really deep. If you haven't ever heard whale song, please Google like whale song and just listen to it for a second. It's really ethereal and amazing. And so they travel really far distances. And it's only really been since then that humans have been like, wow, there's a lot more noise down here than we realized. And whales are big and charismatic. And so usually big male, like humpback whales in Hawaii, you know, they'll be in the tropics to mate and have their babies before they go feed in Antarctica or in Alaska. They go down to a certain level of the ocean. It's called SOFAR. So you can see up there on that graph, on that figure, the sound fixing and ranging channel. There is a absolutely naturally occurring level to the ocean. So an area of the ocean bounded by like salinity, but also by temperature. And it's down pretty far, but not that far, where the water is just perfectly suited to carry low frequency sound for thousands of miles. And so a lot of whales, humans now have learned about it and we try to use it too. But whales will go down into that part of the ocean where just there's not churning up at the surface and it's not too deep, where sound travels really well, and they will release their sound way down into that channel and it will travel so far. So places like Fiji and Hawaii, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there's nothing in terms of land so far in every direction. If you go down to that so far area and you sing, it's just going to spread for hundreds and hundreds of miles, thousands of square miles easily. And so that is just an incredible way that like there's this huge part of the world that you and I have no access to, that these whales are using to like sing and communicate with one another. And whales are mammals, so they're using their larynx and their lungs to do this singing, which is really spectacular. I started with whales only because this is like the first example of like humans understanding acoustic sound communication in the oceans. But I really want to emphasize to you how much like in the last, like, I want to say like maybe 10 years or less, biologists are getting really comfortable understanding the sounds that fishes make. So like Actinopterygian teleost fishes, especially in places like coral reefs, they're a lot louder than we thought. They make a lot of noise. They sing and they chirp and they grunt and they whir and they make all kinds of noises. And so we are just on the very early days of even starting to like understand what it all means and who's saying what and which fish makes what sound. And even if they make a sound, how are they making a sound? How is a fish creating a noise? And so there's a link here on this slide. It says BBC there on the coral. I'm going to stop talking for a second, and I really want you to pause the video and click on that and watch this video. It's like a 5-minute video, and hear the recording of some of these fishes and understand like how bioacoustics of fishes is like a really new science. So go ahead and pause and then watch that. Okay, hopefully you've unpaused and now I've just been quiet for too long on your screen. But isn't that just like incredible? Some of those noises are so cool. If you have the video open still, like the batfish at the beginning, that's like, that's my favorite one. And it's really cool to me that like, we're just like the most basic natural history stage of understanding that biology. We're still figuring out who even makes noise, let alone knowing how they do it. Really cool. I want to show you some of the ways that some anatomists and biologists have figured out how fishes make noise. So you might remember that a large number of fishes, teleost fishes, had those pharyngeal jaws. So not like their maxilla and their dentary up in the front that have teeth, but like back in their throat, they've got another set of jaws. And so one way fishes make a lot of the noises that they make is they grind or snap those jaws. They grind their teeth together, or they kind of open them or clap them shut, but it's happening deep within, like, excuse me, what's effectively their throat. So that's one way they make the noises, using those pharyngeal jaws to like make sort of whirs and clicks. Another way that's super, super cool is using the swim bladder. And I'm sure that isn't surprising you too much. So like you have a lung, a lot of these teleosts have a swim bladder, this air-filled sac that they use for buoyancy. But evolution's always going to be tinkering, and things are always going to be happening in an animal's complicated anatomy. So you have this big thing of air in the middle of your body that's used for buoyancy for the most part. Well, some animals drum on it. There's like a muscle attached to a rib, and they can like flex it, and they can like go bum, 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 like they can make noises on the swim bladder. They can echo with it. That's happening like down here in their bodies. I mean, how cool is that? One of the ones that I like really was surprised by when I was learning about this is how like in the pectoral fins of fishes, so you can imagine they have all those little radials down here in their base of their fin, and then they have those long fin rays, those lepidotrichia. Well, some of those bones way down at the base of the pectoral fin, some fishes can like push against each other, can like have them squeak against each other, like two trees in the forest where one's leaning on each other, or like a violin string. You can like squeak them against each other. And so there's some fishes that move their fins in such a way that they can make these like kind of noises. And so it's exactly like what like things like a cricket's doing when it rubs its back legs together. So how a cricket makes noise is like friction between two tight things. And so there's fishes that use their pectoral fins to make these kind of sounds. When it comes to like the whoops and the chirps, I am really not sure exactly how, and maybe we'll learn about that. But look what's happening here. You're seeing fishes making sounds in their throat with like jaw apparatus, in their body cavity with like something that's homologous to your lung, with their like, not limbs, but their pectoral fins, which are homologous to the base of your limbs, to like squeak against each other. It's just so fantastic to learn that like this anatomy that we've known for so long can be used in these totally different ways. And so fish bioacoustics, like I said, is so new. We talked about this with the senses lecture, but this is all about how making noise happens in fishes. And so I want to just bounce back really quick because we didn't quite cover it how I wanted to when we talked about senses, how some fishes, not all, how some fishes can hear noise. And so pterophysian fishes, so like catfish and piranhas and like minnows and carp, they have these amazing adaptations called Weberian ossicles. So bones that are off of their vertebrae that can transmit sound from the swim bladder. So again, that swim bladder's there, it's full of air, sounds passing through the water into the body of the fish, which is a lot like water, and then hitting this big pocket of air, it's gonna like resonate. And so some fishes, those Ostariophysians, they have these like teeny delicate bones off their vertebrae that transmit sound that's resonating off the swim bladder up to the ears, so where the fish can like hear it, and then of course its brain can interpret it. So fishes are like hearing with their swim bladders. Some of them are making noise with their swim bladders, some of them are making noise with their fins, some of them are making noise with their jaws that are inside their throat. It's all just really spectacular. I don't really have a lot I want you to take away from this other than like appreciating all these ways that we can be like challenged by our expectations of what other animals are doing. And then when we start to really look, wow. All right, so that was sound. And I know that went on for a while, but I really, really love sharing, I think, some of this really cool biology with you guys. Another sense, another way of communicating is touch. You guys, of course, are primates. Human beings, especially, are a kind of organism, an intelligent social organism that benefits a lot from touch. You can be touched in certain ways to really have it be stress relieving and calming, bonding and social pairing, friendship, parental relationships, romantic relationships, all can happen and are really, really, really grounded in a lot of our senses, of course, in a lot of ways communicating, but touch is one of them. And so we see that in a lot of like intelligent or especially like even monogamous animals like those albatross grooming one another, touching one another is a really important part of the lives of so many kinds of animals. So there's this albatross pair grooming each other, those two monkeys grooming each other. The relaxed one looks quite relaxed. But there's other animals that use touch too, as part of other kinds of their life, so other parts of their life. And so mating displays is, of course, another place where communication is like really critical. Communication, but especially within a species, that's very common in a mating situation. So I hope you're enjoying and maybe laughing at that GIF. So what you're seeing is two pond turtles. The one on top is a female. She is standing there. And the one on the bottom is a male. And you can see and in this species, only the males have really long claws on their fingers, just up on their hands. And part of his display to her is touch induced. He's trying to get her to be open to mating with him. And so he's dancing his little claws. Actually, I guess they're not that little. His big long claws on her face. And that's something that, like, instinctually, she is very receptive to. And I guess we would interpret as like enjoys. He is stimulating her. He's trying to get her to be receptive to his advances. And so he's doing it with this like really specialized anatomy with these really long claws on his hands. He doesn't have those claws on his feet. And you can see she doesn't have claws like that on her hands. It's just him. And there are these little things he does to like dance and touch her face and tell her he wants to mate. I think that's just very cute and very fun. There's also really specialized ways that happen. When we talked about reproduction, you guys might remember we talked about some of the salamanders where the male like coaxes the female into this dance, and then he lays some sperm in like a little rod on the ground. And then if she's feeling it, she will pick up that sperm with her cloaca. She will reach down like with the orifice at the back of her body and like pick up the little sperm packet he laid. And so touch is a huge part of so many salamanders' courtship rituals. And so that's a female on the bottom there and a male, and he's just like swirling all around her. And for all kinds of different species of salamander, there's really specific ways that they touch one another to lead up to the point where he has the opportunity to like lay a sperm packet for her to get. There's not going to be internal fertilization. It's not like that. It's trying to like open the physiological receptors in her body to like take in the sperm. So what's really fun is like there's a very rigorous and like for some species of salamander, well-known pattern to the ways they touch one another and like instigate mating. As you can see, there's a graph there, and the green are boxes where like if this happens and then this happens and then this happens, there's going to be cloacal gaping. So that means like her opening up her cloaca to like pick up some sperm he would leave. But there's ways that she can show she's not interested and like break the cycle. But no matter what, there's this very complicated, very touch heavy dance. There's also things like pheromones happening. There's also things like visual signals happening. But touch is really important for getting them to the point of like exchanging the gametes that they want to exchange. It's really beautiful and really fun to imagine something as small and simple seeming as a salamander having these really complex courtship rituals. All right, last little thing. We've talked about scent, we've talked about vision, we've talked about sound, we've talked a little bit about touch. I want to talk just a small bit about electronic signaling. This is something that's completely outside the domain of humans. We don't send electrical signals intentionally, right? We don't have that ability. What you're seeing here are some knife fish. These are all South American fishes. These are all different species of knife fish. So they have really long anal fin on the bottom of their body that they pulse to like swim around. Some of them can be quite small, but these are electrogenic fish. They can make electrical signals. They can communicate with each other via electricity. What's really cool is those species there cohabitate. They all live in the same place. And you can see here, these graphs are all set to the same scale. You can see the voltage, and over time, those are milliseconds, are going across the bottom there. The way they release their electric signals is totally different for each species. There's species-specific ways of releasing electrical signals out so they can recognize each other in the water. These are fishes that are in rivers like the Amazon. And so they might be able to see each other because it's dark or it's cloudy water, but they can like sense each other's electricity and know who's who. So there's things like the amplitude and the voltage that you're seeing there, the frequency, all these measures of electrical output that are species specific. There's ways you can tell each other apart down in the water. So that's interspecific communication using electricity. Pretty fun, having different calls, just like birds have different songs. But I want to talk a little bit about the intraspecific stuff that's happening. So even within a species, of this. Males and females can make different different electrical discharges. And so body size, in this case, males are usually bigger. You can see like the measure of electricity is a measure, a proxy for things like body size or androgen levels. So like the male status of this fish is something that's communicated through the electrical signaling. So even if you can't see him, you can like feel the electricity and sense it and be able to, I don't know if the word is hear it. You could sense the electrical signal and know something about the organism emitting that signal. What species, how big, male, female, really different, huh? And so what I think is really cool is there's all of these awesome behavioral studies for these fishes. And the males, especially during mating season, jam each other. So they will be like releasing electrical signal in the water, trying to communicate, and a rival male can come near them and release like a signal that's like the inverse of the one that's being released by the first male. And it will make it so his signal gets canceled out. They're like jamming each other's radio signals, but they're jamming each other's electrical signals. And if they keep doing that, they can get into fights. They physically start to, you know, bite each other and do all that. But the first few passes and the ways they intimidate each other and the ways they try to stand off with one another is all like electrical pulses and then trying to like jam the other one. I mean, it's spectacular. This is something we had no idea was happening until like ichthyology people started like sticking electrodes in the rivers and trying to study these fish and being like, oh my God, there's so much complex social behavior happening. That's all like electricity based. Elephant fishes are a kind of fish in Africa. And so knife fish are electrical and they're in places like the Amazon. Over on the left, elephant fishes are electrical and they're in rivers like the Congo River. And so you can see these elephant fish have electrosensors, electroreceptors all over their bodies for sensing electricity. The actual organ they have is in their tail. You guys met elephant fishes already when we were talking about senses. So when we talked about electroreception, these are fishes that sort of like generated from their tail at all times, passively have an electromagnetic field around them that they use to detect prey. And then they can reach down with their nose, or with their mouth, I guess, really, and pick up that prey from the bottom. And so that long nose is something that's covered with electroreceptors. And so they can sense each other really well with that long nose. What's really cool is there's a ton of species of these fishes that are only now just being studied. That scientist there, she's holding like two totally different species. The one that's like kind of pink and pasty is like not a particularly deep water species, but like the Congo River in the center part of Africa can be like really turbid and really muddy. And this is a species that only lives like really far down in the river. And so it's in an almost totally dark environment. So it's communicating, it's living its life, using electricity and away from like visible light. So it has like really reduced eyeballs and like it's lost a lot of pigmentation. It's kind of like a cave fish, but it just lives at the bottom of a big dark river and communicates with electricity. Again, I'm showing this to you only because these are fishes that are like being discovered today and their biology is like starting just barely to be understood like today. It's happening right now. Science is always ongoing. We're always learning more things about these fishes. And so what is so cool is, you know, there's those elephant fishes, there's those knife fishes, there's also things like catfishes, you know, that have electricity. And so these different features we're seeing of like electrical communication and electrical competition, they're evolving totally independently in different kinds of fishes all over the world who are living in the same kinds of habitat, big, muddy rivers. And so I know you guys have seen this now in this class so many times, but how cool is it that something as specialized as this kind of evolves again and again with like different details potentially. Certainly the long nose isn't there on the knife fishes, which is a great receiver for electrical signals. But you have these like totally different evolutions of electrogenesis in these freshwater fishes where electricity travels really well. I just think that's really spectacular. And again, it's one of those things I really want you guys to take away from this is how, from this course even, is the incredible nature of science and how we have still so much that we're discovering. That is all I have for you when it comes to communication. I'm going to post another lecture shortly.